On va revenir, tout le monde m'entend bien, je suppose que tout va bien, tout est en ordre. Donc, bonjour, merci à toutes et à tous pour votre présence en ce jeudi matin. Je suis Roxanne Mallet, membre du comité scientifique et étudiante au doctorat en histoire de l'art, option muséologie, ici même à l'Université de Montréal, dans mon salon. Sous la direction de Kristen Tenton, j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter nos premières panélistes, notre première modératrice ainsi que l'orientation de ce bloc. Ce tout premier panel de notre colloque aborde les espaces tels qu'ils sont revendiqués et réappropriés par les luttes queer et féministes. Il examine les réappropriations féministes des archives et questionne les représentations queer qui s'opposent entre fantasme et marginalité. Il inspire également des réflexions féministes sur l'art et la résistance dans le cadre de la création de réseaux et de lieux de partage, mais aussi de contestation. Notre première intervenante est Lexington Davis, récemment diplômée de l'Université VU d'Amsterdam au deuxième cycle avec l'appui de la bourse Fulbright. Basée à Athènes, en Grèce, elle est actuellement conservatrice. Elle a travaillé au musée finlandais de la photographie d'Helsinki, au musée Stedelijk d'Amsterdam et au musée du comté de Los Angeles. Elle nous expose aujourd'hui ses recherches sur un projet éphémère mais influent du milieu des années 70, présenté alors en tant qu'une nouvelle source d'alternative d'information féministe, pour laquelle seul un petit nombre de vidéolettres originales archivées et restaurées subsistent. Toward an International Feminist Media Network, The Video Letters Projects revient ainsi sur les collectifs féminins, états-uniens, canadiens et néo-zélandais ayant contribué à ce réseau de 1975 à 1977. Notre deuxième intervenante sur ce panel est Iraboti Kazi, doctorante en histoire de l'art à l'Université de Western Ontario. Ses recherches explorent comment les espaces présentés dans les peintures pastorales italiennes du début de la modernité sont reconfigurés et mobilisés dans les constructions de la nature dans le cinéma queer. Elle nous présente aujourd'hui Queer Notions of the Family in Photographic Representation of Ishras, où elle examine l'hétérotopie et le queering de l'espace par rapport à la famille Ishra. Elle soutient que l'espace présenté dans les photographies est hétérotopique, existant en dehors du temps ou de l'espace identifiable, permettant ainsi l'expression de soi quand il n'est pas autrement possible. Le thème Ishra est utilisé en Asie du Sud pour définir une personne biologiquement désignée comme mâle ou intersexuée à la naissance, ayant l'identité de genre féminine. Elle s'appuie sur les œuvres de Kami Ira en 2012, de Shahria Sharmin et la série Ishra Fantasy de 2006 de Tejal Shah. Page suivante. Ce premier panel sera modéré par Maissa Jelloul, membre du comité scientifique de ce colloque, étudiante au doctorat en communication à l'Université de Montréal sous la direction de Géographies. Elle est également diplômée de l'École supérieure des sciences et technologies, du design et de l'Institut supérieur des beaux-arts de Tunis. Son profil est caractérisé par la multidisciplinarité, puisque ses recherches sont situées à la croisée des études médiatiques, féministes et la culture populaire, du design et des arts visuels. Maissa explore les relations entre intimité et politique dans le contexte post-insurrectionnel tunisien. Elle se questionne précisément sur les manières dont le dispositif des talk shows permet la négociation des normes de l'intime. Avant de laisser la parole à nos panélistes, je vous rappelle que la formule de ce colloque est supportée par la fonction webinaire Zoom. Une période de questions est prévue à la fin des deux présentations qui suivront. Nous vous demandons d'attendre l'ouverture de ce segment pour lancer la discussion en posant vos questions via le clavardage pour faciliter le travail de nos modératrices ou en levant la main avec l'option « Lever la main ». En cas de pépin technologique, vous êtes invité à consulter notre page Facebook ou Instagram pour plus d'informations. Profitez-en pour vous abonner pour ne rien manquer. Merci et bon visionnement.
Hello, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here today, although sadly not in person. My name is Lexington Davis. I study at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. And today I'll be presenting my presentation toward an international feminist media network, the Video Letters Project, 1975 to 1977. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let me know if you have any issues with audio or with seeing the images. Let me just click. Sorry, bear with me while I connect this. I'm sorry, I'm trying to share the screen, but it's asking me to quit out of Zoom.
It's the technician from University of Montreal, so you can use the green button.
Yes, I clicked that. It took me to a security page. Sorry for this. I've done this before, so I'm not sure. Okay, wait, maybe this. Okay, is this now should be working? Okay. In the spring of 1975, women's film and video groups across the US convened at conferences in New York and Los Angeles to discuss their shared struggles and goals. It was the height of the second wave feminist movement, and attendees were eager to connect with like-minded women across the country. Conference participants came up with a variety of plans for connection and professional development, but the most ambitious proposal was arguably the Video Letters Project. Participating groups decided to produce and exchange 30-minute video letters on a monthly basis, with the goal of creating an international feminist news network that would rival the mainstream media. At the conference, they outlined their objectives in a collectively authored Womanifesto, which asserted, "We do not accept the existing power structure, and we are committed to changing it by the content and structure of our images, and by the way we relate to each other in our work and with our audience. Making and showing our work is an ongoing cyclical process, and we are responsible for changing and developing our approaches as we learn from this experience." Their goals went beyond simply making new video works and sharing them with other women. Through the structure of their network, they aimed to radically redefine the media system, showing how differently it could function when divorced from patriarchal influence. I argue that by having women's collectives take control over production, distribution, screenings, and reception, Video Letters created an alternative system that operated independently from the mainstream media. In addition, I consider how the network's innovative use of feedback drove the development of form, fostering a performative, process-oriented, reflexive style of video making. I will begin by discussing the structure and organization of the network, while reflecting on how the project both aligned with and diverted from the guerrilla television movement of the 1960s and 70s. I will continue by analyzing a selection of the tapes produced as part of the project, evaluating how their form and content related to the political goals of the feminist movement. Lastly, I will briefly address the legacy of the Video Letters Project with attention to the challenges of researching early video history. As stated in their manifesto, Video Letters had multiple goals: to develop the work itself and to construct new channels for distribution, presentation, and feedback, with the idea of bringing more women to the medium. Feminists of the 70s were drawn to video for a number of reasons. They were among the first generation to grow up with television in their homes and keenly understood its potential as a tool for reaching wider audiences. Another reason women turned to video was because, as a relatively new medium, it did not have an established patriarchal genealogy. As many critics have since noted, video's popularization coincided with the rise of the women's movement, and feminist politics helped define its possibilities as a representational form. At the same time, the Video Letters Project is arguably also aligned with guerrilla television, a grassroots counterculture media movement that directly challenged the supremacy of broadcast television. However, most guerrilla television groups were dominated by men, even though they often depended on the hidden devotion of women members, as the video artist Shigeko Kubota recalls. With a few notable exceptions, media collectives of the 70s did not generally prioritize feminist issues. And so Video Letters addressed a lacuna in the alternative video world. By only including women's collectives, Video Letters made certain that feminist concerns would not be drowned out by competing political issues. In this way, the network was able to unify its disparate members more easily, as all shared a common interest in women's liberation. The network was split into 3 constellations that each included collectives from 3 to 5 different cities. The groups would first share their tapes with other collectives in their constellation, and after all works had been screened, they would forward a combined package of videos to another constellation. In most cities, tapes were publicly screened at a local alternative space, roughly once a month, though in certain cases, the videos were broadcasted on cable television. Screenings ended with a feedback session where audience members could share impressions and advice. These conversations were recorded and included with the next round of tapes. This way, feedback from other members within the network directly influenced the evolution of the tape's form, content, and aesthetics, and contributed to the advancement of the women's video-related skills. Many of the collectives participating in the project had only just begun using video, which was still a very new medium at the time, and they were eager to learn how to improve their techniques and approach. Organizers noticed that members progressed more quickly than was usual with video, and they attributed this fast learning process to the feedback sessions and the collaborative organizational structure. It was arguably video's unique medial properties that made the network possible in the first place. Compared to celluloid film, video was much cheaper and did not require a lengthy processing time. It was far more lightweight, which made it easier to distribute via the mail. Because of these qualities, the Video Letters network was entirely self-sustaining. Each member contributed to all parts of the process. Participating groups collaborated to create videos, to disseminate them, to organize screenings of other collectives' videos, and to record feedback. Producers were also audience members, which fostered a non-hierarchical power relation between members, as their roles were constantly shifting. While numerous artists and video collectives used the Postal Service to exchange work throughout the 70s, few of the resulting networks were as community-driven as Video Letters. Like many other feminist projects, Video Letters prioritized social connection and affinity. Mary Gerard argues, quote, "By contrast to men's networks, which were typically structured along vertical professional lines, women's networks were friendship networks, laterally spread and geographically unbounded," end quote. The women participating in the project did not simply see Video Letters as a means of sharing their work and gaining exposure to the work of others, but they also considered it a chance to build relationships with their local feminist communities through public events that encouraged discussion. The network thus simultaneously operated at the international and the local levels. Organizers initially instructed collectives to send unedited work. At the time, editing video was relatively time-consuming, and members wanted to ensure that videos were regularly screened in order to remain topical and responsive to current events. However, this sometimes resulted in videos that audiences found dull and difficult to watch. In one case, an audience collectively decided to turn a video off prematurely after struggling to make sense of it. The timeline was later modified to accommodate longer periods of production and editing, which allowed groups to create more polished products. Debbie George, a member of Spectra Feminist Media Project in Washington, D.C., argued that watchability was crucial if feminists wanted to get their message across. She noted that audiences had certain preconceived notions about video's ideal aesthetics and form, as, quote, people expect video to look like what comes over their television set, end quote. However, the focus of the Video Letters project remained on information sharing and process rather than the perfection of technique, and therefore the tapes vary widely in both content and structure. The network included experienced filmmakers as well as novices, all of whom were united in their commitment to feminist politics. Feminists considered hierarchical structures a product of patriarchal society, and Video Letters thus encouraged activists and amateurs to collaborate with artists and documentarians. Video's capacity for instantaneous feedback permitted producers to share footage with their subjects. This allowed for a greater degree of collaboration and fostered a more horizontal power relation between those behind and in front of the camera. A sense of camaraderie characterizes the relationship between the video producers and their subjects in a 1975 tape made by the Rochester Women's Video Collective. The video features an interview with Deborah Granger, a young switchboard operator who discusses the casual sexism she endures as a, quote, office girl at a law firm. She sarcastically describes her daily interactions with the lawyers she works for, poking fun at their ignorance and paternalism. Granger's absurd anecdotes from her workplace cause those recording her to repeatedly break out in laughter. And when she laughs in response, it becomes clear that everyone is in on the same joke, one that articulates a profound criticism of the socio-political status quo. Writing on feminist documentaries of the era, Julia Lesage argues that, quote, the self-conscious act of telling one's story as a woman in a politicized yet personal way gives the older tool of women's subcultural resistance, conversation, a new social force as a tool for liberation, end quote. This chatty, informal approach differs starkly from the interviewing norms of male-dominated broadcast television of the time, which usually featured aloof reporters and presenters. In contrast, the Rochester video is intimate and openly subjective. No one attempts to obscure their political perspective. Through their laughter and animated discussion, the participants pose a cogent critique of women's inequitable treatment in the workplace. In other tapes, the political perspective is even more clearly articulated. In a 1975 tape, Spectra Feminist Media Project covered a demonstration by the Coalition of Labor Union Women in a rather straightforward manner, similar to a nighttime news segment. Their tape features long shots of a marching crowd, formal interviews, and clips of speeches. However, unlike on broadcast television, Spectra's tape reveals its own process of production, with crew members occasionally providing feedback and discussing their filming strategy while the camera is rolling. For example, after Spectra's camerawoman finishes filming an interview with a demonstrator, we hear their conversation continue off screen. The interviewee laughs and says, quote, "You have to think fast when people are throwing questions at you," end quote. Camerawoman responds by reassuring her, insisting, quote, "No, you did great," end quote. Though this off-the-cuff conversation may have been included unintentionally, it diminishes the distance between the video's maker and subject. It effectively reveals a moment of intimacy, vulnerability, and encouragement between two women that likely would never have been depicted on network news. Later in the tape, As the camerawoman is recording speeches, we hear her ask a colleague, quote, "Do we want this? I'll get a couple," end quote. The incorporation of remarks like these illustrates the group's collaborative approach to production and demystifies their working process. It also rejects the authoritative position generally preferred by producers of mainstream nonfiction film, video, and television. In her research on feminist video collectives in 1970s France, Rosemary notices similar qualities in their tapes. Her description of their work could easily apply to the video letters as well. She argues that the camera draws, quote, attention to the body through the kinds of gestures it performs, which are rarely fixed, as the video camera and the recorder becomes itself a body among others. On its most explicit level, the camera never seems to be simply taping during a protest, but is always also protesting itself, end quote. Indeed, in the Spectra video, it becomes clear that the tape's producers are not only at the demonstration to document, but also to participate. Like most early video initiatives, the Video Letters Project fostered an intimate yet insular community that never reached a mass audience. With their ambitious goals to create an alternative media system that could compete with the mainstream news, Video Letters, like other guerrilla television projects, ultimately fell short of their utopian ideals. Yet even with these limitations, Video Letters successfully connected feminist media collectives to a wider international audience. With its focus on process and development, the project also created a context in which women could experiment with the medium. This resulted in performative, reflexive works that are conversational and intimate. Unfortunately, over the decades, most of the tapes produced for the project have been lost. Information about the individual collectives is also largely missing, and thus it is extremely challenging to construct an overview of the network. The limited number of extant tapes document a learning process and reveal how feminists were confronting a new medium and creating a new formal language. However, they say little about who was behind the camera and what kinds of communities were represented. Was the Video Letters Project inclusive, intersectional? Were there internal struggles or disagreements over politics, as was the case in so many radical art and media collectives? That remains the subject of future research. For now, the project serves as an essential yet overlooked experiment in how feminists successfully cultivated a collaborative, self-sustaining media network by taking control of the production, distribution, presentation, and reception of their work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Davis. Maintenant, on va passer à la présentation de Irabuti Kazi, Queer Notions of the Family in Photographic Representation of Hijras. Donc, Irabuti, c'est à toi.
I'm just going to share my screen right now. Can you guys see my screen by any chance or no? Not yet. Oh, okay. Hi, thank you for the introduction. And this is my first Zoom conference, so I'm a little nervous. So can everyone see my screen? I think, okay. In this presentation, I will explore the concept of the heterotopia and the queering of space in relation to hijra families and photography. The term hijra, which has no exact match in the Western taxonomy of gender, is used in South Asian countries to define those biologically designated as male or intersex at birth with feminine gender identity and eventually adopt feminine gender roles. Recent scholarship has argued that the hijras cannot be understood with reference to sex and gender alone, but construct themselves in terms of a multiplicity of differences, including religion, region, kinship, and class. Despite being one of the oldest transgender communities in the world, Hijras face extreme marginalization as they are excluded from almost all aspects of society. Social and familial ostracization leads most Hijras to leave their homes and live in communities where they feel a strong sense of belonging. In South Asian conservative societies, the Hijras' presence represents a devaluing of gender binaries and the stability of gender. Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Indian governments' recognition of the Hijra as a third gender in 2013 and 2014 did little to improve the everyday realities of being excluded by society, as few are able to get legal protection, education, healthcare, or even legitimate work. Due to their defiance of gender binaries and distinct characteristics, such as colorful makeup or clothing, the Hijras have captured the interest and imagination of photographers since early colonial photography. There is a tendency, however, amongst photographers, especially those of non-South Asian descent, to emphasize the otherness of the Hijras. Few contemporary South Asian female artists are now shifting the focus from the display of the Hijra bodies to attempting to share their subjectivity. It should be noted that these artists are not Hijras, so given their position as non-Hijras, it is impossible for them to fully convey the Hijra subjectivity. Rather, these photographers act as allies who use their position to amplify Hijra voices. Bangladeshi photographer Sharia Sharmin and the Indian queer video, performance, and photo artist Sejal Shah's works challenge the broader social stigmas towards the hypervisible yet misunderstood community by humanizing them and providing an intimate view of their desires. Sharmin's ethereal black and white series called Call Me Hina, which began in 2012, presents the Hijras in their private spaces, while Shah creates studio portraits referencing well-known literary, visual, and religious traditions in her Hijra fantasy series from 2006. I argue that the spaces presented in the photographs are heterotopic. In his 1967 lecture, Espaces, Autres, Foucault describes the heterotopia as an effectively enacted utopia in which the real sites, all the other real sites that can be found within the culture, are simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted. Foucault names a number of counter sites, including cemeteries, brothels, holidays, and prisons, which are all outside of the ordinary, containing a disruption of time and space. The Hijras in the photographs are in real locations, but are also seemingly outside of any identifiable time or space. Thus, they are allowed self-expression when it is not otherwise possible. The photographed Hijras often seek traditional roles of mother or wife and other types of hyperfeminine roles, which are considered taboo in South Asian societies where only biologically designated women are considered to be female. The heterotopic space of the photograph allows for an exploration of the Hijra's desires in ways that subvert gender norms while still preserving heteronormative ideals of the family. Thus, the heterotopic space allows enough distance to explore fantasies while still being rooted in reality. Due to the constraint of time, I will focus on this image of motherhood from both artists, but I will just start by talking a little bit about the background of the images. Sharmin embarked on the project in 2012 upon meeting and befriending a Hijra community. This allowed her to photograph them as they traveled from Bangladesh to India with the hopes of finding a little more understanding. Typical of many Bangladeshis, The cisgender heterosexual Charmin grew up believing that hijras were, quote, less than human as their physical appearance, their behavior, and their general way of life set them apart from her country's conservative society, end quote. Her interaction with the hijras, particularly Hina, changed her perspective. Sharia says about Hina, she made me understand her and others who live in her community as mothers, daughters, friends, and lovers they actually are, end quote. Charmin shoots her subjects individually or in pairs and interviews them. A part of the interview is used in the caption. The places in the photographs are, to quote Foucault, outside of all places, even though it may be possible to indicate their location in reality. While the dark atmospheric photographs are taken in real locations, the space in the images blur reality, thus creating a sense of dislocation as the images seem to be outside of the boundaries of time and space. In contrast to the images without any geographical markers, the captions include their chosen names, their ages, and a little bit of their history or their dreams. Without any evidence of the heavy, colorful makeup that is typically associated with the hijras or the social stigmas towards them, Charmin seems to highlight their experience as human. The heterotopic space of the photograph aims to challenge the persisting social stigmas attached to the hijra community by releasing images that the artist believes to convey a different reality to the world. Both Shah and Charmin use the word breathe when describing the impetus behind their projects. Charmin hopes that her work will, quote, help the hijras find a breathing space in a claustrophobic society like ours, and it will help them find new friends in their friendless world. Thus, her soft, blurry toned images evoke subtle feminine iconography. Here, the hijras exist in a fertile landscape, aglow with the light of the moon. Their gestures are imbued with ineffable spiritual powers. In her series, Shah wanted to breathe life into queer desires that are lived in the realm of fantasy or hidden from the public eye. Shubhani Jiwani explains, Shah felt that the secret desires of the hijras and more generally the members of the LGBTQI+ communities in India, of which she's a part, are rarely entered in the public domain and remain tucked away in the chambers of the mind. Her need to bring the fantasies to life was accomplished through the heterotopic space of the performative and visual art. The breathing space in the photograph gives the hijra a chance to show themselves without judgment and explore their fantasies as mother or lover, or in some case, Bollywood star. Through Shah's close relationship and discussions of how they saw themselves in the fantastic world, she creates photographs showing the famous Mumbai-based human rights activist Lakshmi as the Indian Cleopatra, Malini as a Varma painting, and Maheshwari as a Bollywood film star. Unlike Charmin, Shah's images have rich painted studio backdrops. The backgrounds do not simply substitute the absence for the referent, but also create spaces for exploration, as Christopher Pinney had explained. The studios function, as Pinney states, as chambers of dreams where personal exploration and an infinite range of alter egos is possible through the adoption of gestures and through the deployment of costumes and props. Thus, in this case, photography is prized not for its ability to produce indexical traces, but rather a creative, transformative space of the image that allows the subject to, quote unquote, come out better. For example, in the studio space, the notions of class and the factors determining the hijra's place in the social order are replaced by opulent fantasies that put them in the forefront. As Shah explains, The opulence of the chosen reference also helps to transcend the class hierarchies that prevent the hijras from moving into any position of power and privilege. While the heterotopia is a countersite, it is connected to real places. Thus, Charman's photographs are grounds for exploring desires, but they are also spaces for contemplating the complexities of reality. In the photo with the caption, "Always desiring to be a mother, I have adopted Boishaki, but I wonder what if she calls me father someday," Salma 27. The audience sees what appears to be an ordinary image of a loving mother with her child. What makes this common image of a mother and child subversive is the gender identity of the hijra. What is considered a fantasy for the hijra is part of the everyday life for non-hijra people. The photographic space allows for an exploration of these fantasies, but also brings forth real issues and fears, such as Salma's worries about being addressed as a father by Boishaki. In Bangladeshi society, where families have have defined roles based on gender, the fear of being misgendered by a child is legitimate. In this space, we see the hijra as a happy mother, but her worries remind us of the outside world where her physical body is given precedence over gender identity and desires. As mentioned, Shah listened to her subjects' desires and incorporated them into various historical frameworks. Based on Malini's statement, I want to point out to the moon and tell my child that he or she can reach out and touch the moon. Shah presented Malini, who expressed a desire to be a mother, as a Ravi Varma painting. In the portrait, "You Too Can Touch the Moon," Yashoda and Krishna, Shah evokes the famous Indian painter Raja Ravi Varma's painting named Yashoda and Krishna. Shah pays great attention to details to ensure that the composition, the position of the subjects within the frame, their lavish costumes and gestures all bear resemblance to the original. Shah states that this photo fantasy of Malini is clearly meant to function as a perverse questioning of Ravi Varma's mythological pictures and the colonial history that produced them. Furthermore, representing Malini as Yashoda, the foster mother of Krishna, connects the hijra to a religious mother figure. Similar to the hijra mother, the shepherdess Yashoda did not give birth to Krishna, but adopted the child god. Iconographically, the image of Malini is placed in the framework of mother and son poses, thus creating a place for her in the historical narrative of images of mother and sons, even in a fantasy setting. The caption reveals the artist's desire to open up motherhood and make it relational and dissociated from biological reproduction. The studio setting is also reminiscent of family photo shoots before cameras were readily available. Since South Asian families are structured based on mother, father, children, Shah subverts this heteronormative concept of the family through a family photo shoot with a hijra mother and her son. Both of these series have been displayed in international exhibitions and online, and have received numerous awards, positive reviews from LGBTQ+ organizations, and attention from South Asian and international press. Along with garnering positive attention for the hijras, the photographer's activism and actions outside of the studio allow them to emerge out of the heterotopic space of the studio and make impact in the real world. Charman is interested in the dynamics between her subjects and their families, both birth families and the ones that they make for themselves. Although many of her subjects yearn to return to their biological families, they're often unable to do so because of relatives, especially their fathers, who do not accept them. In the latter, less publicized part of Charmin's project, she creates portraits of her Hijra friends and their families, hoping to spur reconciliation on a personal level, for which she traveled throughout the country and interviewed the families. Shah has also been working with Hijra since 2003. I don't know if she's still doing so, but she has an acute understanding of the discrimination and the exploitation that they face in society. The other portion of her project that is part of the exhibition that she did in 2006 focuses on their trauma and the mistreatment of the Hijras. Shah states that this exhibition is not just art for me, this is an issue. By creating heterotopic spaces in their projects, both artists do not simply document the Hijras, but give a rare insight into their fantasies. While the Hijras may be viewed as an other by society, their desire for familial bonds show mainstream audiences what they want in life is not so different from the rest of them. Okay. That is it.
Thank you so much, both. Your presentations were really amazing. So do you prefer to have a period of question in English, or is it okay if we ask the questions in French? Like, do you understand a bit?
I don't know if I will understand enough. I understand a bit, but I'm not confident enough to say I will understand it fully.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, same for me. I think I can understand main points, but I think if there's, you know, a more sort of like specific question, I might not capture the whole.
I'll do my best to translate, but just acknowledge that English is my third language, so I might not translate it the best way possible. For our audience, if you want to ask any question, you can either raise your hand, or there is also, if you prefer to write the question, you can use the question-réponse. So yeah, I have a few questions on my own. The first one is for Davis. I was just wondering, like, how did you find this network and this archive, especially since it happened a long time ago? So I was just curious about like how you came across this network.
Yeah, so this research project is actually a chapter of my master's thesis. And I found this project, the Video Letters project, basically by digging around in archives, looking at a space, an alternative feminist space in New York called the Women's Interart Center. And they hosted video letters screenings, and they also made some of the video letters. So I think I first came across it through this research. That yeah, often is the case. I think you look for one thing and you find something else.
Yeah. Well, is there other networks nowadays that are like that? Do you know if there is like new networks or like new spaces where people would share feminist content?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can think of one very good example. It's a bit old by now because it's from the 90s, but the video and performance artist Miranda July, she organized a chain letter, a video chain letter, where just anyone who wanted to participate could sign up, and they would contribute a video, and then they would get a tape with videos of other people in this, I think, more loosely organized network. And it was called Joni for Jackie. So that's, I think, a later example that's most closely related to video letters. But in terms of, you know, really recent examples, I think because of the internet, The structure of these kind of exchanges is so different now. It's not so, I mean, it's so much, it's more instantaneous. You can just share your videos and someone can immediately access it. It doesn't need all these layers of administration and manual work that went into it in the 70s.
I have one last question. I have so many questions for you. Yeah, do you know which kind of audience the network that you study was targeting? Was it like a broader audience or like feminist one?
Yeah, I would have to say that I think it was mostly targeting a feminist audience. There's actually, I have a quote in a different part of my thesis where basically someone was arguing that at the time in the 70s, feminists were mostly making their work for other women because there was just not an interest in this work, not a strong interest in this work in the kind of mainstream institutional channels. So they really kind of took it into their own hands and said, you know, if we can't have a mainstream audience, we'll just make our own audience. And I think because of the structure of the video letters network, how they screened the video letters at mostly at women's art or cultural spaces, and then they created these feedback videos. I would say that I think it was really for women, and I don't think they really thought that this work would immediately reach a very broad audience. But I mean, I probably should do more research to really look into the expectations of audience.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody that wants to ask another question? Not really. Well, I'll continue then with my many questions. So this one is for Iraboti. Do I say your name properly?
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
That's great. Okay. So your work really speaks to me personally. And honestly, I feel like my work has many links with yours. Because like I'm also using a notion, like I'm using a word to talk about intimacy because I study intimacy, and it has some religious connotations since it's coming from the Muslim vocabulary. And the word that I'm studying is a sutra, which is it's about hiding intimacy. So it's about veiling intimacy. So the first question that I have for you, and maybe the one that you can respond to, is like, did you look at the history of the word hijra? Like, does it have specific connotations attached to it, or like, is it like something that people would use every day and it will just like identify the people? Like, does it have more connotations to it?
I did actually look at it. I don't remember the exact etymology of it, but hijra is one of the many words used in South Asian cultures and languages to describe these male to female transgender, in quotation, type of people. So it doesn't really necessarily have this sort of connotation of a religion or anything attached to it. It is just a term for this specific group of people in Hindi or in Bengali. So
Okay,
your research sounds like really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe if we look at of the movement of certain words through history, sometimes we can find like a lot of research paths. So yeah, this is why I was asking. The second question, honestly, like we can do many theses if we want to respond to that question, but it's about like making the intimacy visible. So I was wondering like what you think is happening, like how do I phrase that? It's like how like making intimacy visible would affect the norms of gender, you know? Will it reinforce these norms or like make them more fluid? And like I saw that the photographers did a wonderful job by like trying to listen to hijras and try to convey their view and their fantasies through the photographies. But yeah, I was wondering what you thought about that.
I think I do mention this in another portion of my paper that I didn't actually say here, but especially for Charmin's work, intimacy is a really big part of it, and I think for her using that intimacy and the relationships that hijras have within like their communities and outside of it is a way of humanizing them to a broader audience, because I grew up in Bangladesh for a little bit, and there is that sort of like, there's a view that, okay, hijras exist, but they're not like us, they're different. So there isn't that curiosity or any desire to understand them as people. There are small groups like NGOs and health organizations that are trying to aid them, but most of it is just kind of an ethnographic study of these people. So what I find really interesting is with art, and especially these photographers that I mentioned, is that their focus is on those elements of intimacy. So Charmin only uses maybe like max 2 people, so it's usually just one person or duo of like friends in images. So you see those bonds and you see those words come through in a way that we don't get otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So she's actually bringing empathy and like humanizing them through the photographies. But it's really, really interesting. Like we can talk for hours, I guess, if we get into it. But yeah, the one last question I had, maybe we still have like 5 minutes, I guess. So if anybody wants to ask a question, it's still, oh, there is a question. Okay, so I'll ask my question first and then maybe move to the other one. For you still, Iraboti, so I was wondering, what was your relationship to your research? Like, do you have a personal story about it? Like what, like do you have a personal relationship to that research, or is it a subject that is passionating to you and you wanted to look closer to it?
No personal stories, sadly, but I'm actually currently studying queer cinema and Renaissance art. So this is sort of my secondary research interest, and I'm beginning from Bangladesh and like hearing about hijras and seeing them, but never actually being able to like communicate with them as a child. This is something that's always interested me, and coming across these works, especially Charmin's work, kind of open up my eyes. And because I'm studying queer cinema, this sort of transitions into that, and being able to use Foucault's theory in this way initially was sort of a testing ground because I'm studying space in cinema, but this became more than that. So no personal story, but some academic ties to my research.
That's great. Thank you so much. So there is a question for Davis from Flavie Duclos. So I think somebody translated it for me. Okay, so I will read the question in French and then in English. Par rapport au feedback, ils étaient ajoutés aux vidéos et est-ce qu'il influençait le contenu final? Est-ce que tu penses que ce type de feedback par rapport à l'audience qui s'ajoute à l'œuvre est encore présent? Est-ce que c'est une condition pour créer une horizontalité entre l'audience et les créateurs? Donc, ça, c'est la question. Donc, in relation to the feedback, were they added to the videos and did they influence the final content? Do you think that this type of audience feedback that is added to the work is still present? Is it a condition to create a horizontally between the audience and the creators? So yeah, she said, sorry, I'm French, so maybe
no,
I
it's okay.
understand everything.
I didn't. It's very complicated, and I've also struggled to really put the pieces back together of how it all worked, because it's quite a complex network with a lot of moving parts. So what I understand is that the feedback sessions would be recorded, and then it would be included with the next package of videos that they would send. So a constellation would send their new videos, but also a video of the feedback. So if I understand correctly, I don't think that the feedback sessions ever resulted in a group, like remaking a video or re-editing it. But I think what it did was it gave them advice or ideas of what to do in the next video, because they were making these videos very regularly. So I think that's how it worked. And regarding the horizontality, I think it was just one piece of what really fostered this like horizontal equal environment. And it's possible I'm sort of looking at it too positive. I actually don't know. Maybe there were sort of power struggles or challenges between the people in the network. But my understanding is that because everyone got to be a creator and everybody got to be a critic, it sort of leveled the playing field in that way. And if it still exists, yes, I've seen one feedback session that still exists. And it's very interesting because you hear people in the audience talking about video as a medium, saying, I just want to remind everyone that this is a visual medium. So instead of, just having a stationary camera filming, a podium where people are getting up and down to make speeches, make it a little more visually interesting. So in that way, they were really giving advice about how to approach it as a medium.
So Roxanne, do you wanna? Okay.
Yes. Thank you all. Merci beaucoup et merci aussi aux participants et aux gens qui sont venus voir les conférences de s'être adaptés au bilinguisme de notre belle journée. Thank you, Lexington Davis and Ihabati Kazi. Merci aussi à Maissa pour la médiation. We will all invite you to a lunch break and we'll come back at 1 p.m. Ça va être l'heure de notre belle pause dîner. On va tous revenir ensemble à 1h. Et on va pouvoir aussi poursuivre les discussions pour ceux qui sont intéressés en fin d'après-midi sous forme d'une discussion joviale, conviviale, tous ensemble. So thanks again. And if you're free, we invite you to the end of day discussion to explore other side of this conversation. It was very interesting. Thank you so much. Et voilà. Merci à toutes. Merci encore une fois, Maissa. J'espère que ma traduction en direct vous a plu et je vous invite à passer une très belle pause dîner. Merci.
Merci à toi, Roxane.